This tank never existed, this one belongs to the wrong country, and this one was added through fake documents and forgeries. In this video, we'll talk about some of the fictional and incorrectly modeled vehicles in War Thunder. Starting it off in no particular order is the M1 KVT, or the Krasnovian variant tank. During the Cold War, the US Army needed a way to train its troops against Soviet-style tactics and equipment. As a result, the National Training Center was established in 1980 at Fort Irwin in California. To simulate the enemy, the fictional country of Krasnovia was created, and the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment was chosen to play as the Krasnovians. To make exercises more realistic, they fitted the M551 Sheridan tank with visual modification, or VisMod kits, to resemble Soviet vehicles like the T-72 and BMP. These worked surprisingly well and were used all the way up until 2003, at which point the Sheridan simply became too old and costly to maintain. The M1A1 Abrams was chosen as a replacement since they were being phased out by that point and the army still had plenty in stock. As a result, the M1A1 Krasnovian variant tank was created, equipped with an IR searchlight, fuel drums, and ERA blocks, all of which were dummy VisMods. So, why is it in this video? The tank we have in the game is the M1 Abrams with the 105mm cannon. The tank in real life is the M1A1 with the 120mm gun. This wasn't some oversight by the devs. According to Smin, one of the community managers, the American tech tree didn't have a premium 10.7 MBT like the other nations at the time. The KVT could have been added as an M1A1, but that would have bumped its BR up to 12.0. So instead, the developers gave the visual modifications to the M1 and called it a day. They could have chosen a different tank for the role, but honestly, I prefer something cool looking like this rather than a regular copy-paste variant. Realism rank, C. This one is a bit complicated. In 1942, Ferdinand Porsche was commissioned by Hitler to design an indestructible super heavy tank with lots of armor and firepower. Porsche then proceeded to sketch out the mouse tank we all know and love. Two prototypes were completed in 1944, but during testing, it became apparent that the tank was extremely slow and unreliable. The program was cancelled in the same year, and the prototypes were captured by the Soviets, and the tank is now displayed at the Kubinka Tank Museum. Back in 1942, when the first designs were being created, Krupp, a competitor of Porsche, also began drafting a super heavy tank. Their finished design became known as the Tiger Mouse, since it used existing components from the Tiger tanks. It was meant to be a lighter, more realistic version of what Hitler requested, but the Führer wanted maximum armor, so the original design was chosen. There is also the fact that Porsche and Hitler were close friends, which may have led to some bias. Now, at the same time as the mouse was being developed, a new series of tanks called the Entwicklung series started development. These were an attempt to create standardized and simpler designs to be mass-produced at a low cost. One of such tanks was the E100, which was the heaviest tank of the series, designed for the same role as the mouse. It took the design of the Tiger Mouse and developed it further, not as a rival to Porsche, but an attempt to reduce cost and standardize production. A single unfinished prototype was built in 1945, but the project was abandoned alongside the mouse as they were both impractical and extremely expensive to build. So the only tanks which made it to the prototype stage were the mouse and E100, which are the two tanks we see in the game. That being said, the E100 never had a turret. The single prototype was only the hull. The turret of both the mouse and Tiger Mouse were considered, but the project was stopped before they could be tested. Now, when the devs were adding the E100, the mouse was already in the game by that point, so the easiest solution was just to copy-paste the turret. The problem is, the E100 simply couldn't carry such a heavy turret and would have collapsed in on itself if it was ever mounted. For this reason, a special new design was created called the Mouse 2 term, which was much lighter and would have been used if the project continued. Not only that, but the E100's prototype used a 700 horsepower engine compared to the 900 horsepower one we have in the game. That one's fair enough though. To carry a turret, the 900 horsepower engine was considered if development continued, but like I said, it never went that far. So, as a result, the E100 we have in the game carries both an impossibly heavy turret and runs on an engine which was never used. Realism rank, D. In the late 1930s, Hungary was looking to purchase modern medium tanks for their arsenal, and several designs were considered. Landsverk, a Swedish arms manufacturer, took interest and designed the Lago, a tank built for export. To meet the requirements put forth by the Hungarian army, the tank was fitted with a 40mm cannon and a number of machine guns. By the time a prototype was built, however, Hungary had already adopted the Škoda T21, which later became the Turan 1. Luckily for Landsverk though, the Swedish army took interest in a medium tank program of their own, and the Lago was developed further and became the STRV M42. In War Thunder though, the Lago I carries a 37mm Bofors, not a 40mm cannon. This is where things get a bit murky. According to some sources, the prototype carried the 40mm, while others claim that, for testing, the 37mm was used. Some also say that the prototype only had a wooden mock-up turret with a dummy gun. Now, if we're gonna go by Occam's razor, the fact that Sweden already had the Bofors cannons meant that they could use them for testing, and Hungary never bought them in the first place, so there's no reason a Hungarian 40mm would be used. That's just my take on it though. If you can provide more context, leave it in the comments. Realism rank B. This is probably the most egregious example of fictional vehicles in War Thunder. Despite what its name might suggest, the whole reproduction is pretty much a complete fabrication. Towards the end of World War II, Japan realized that pretty much all of their tanks were outmatched against modern Allied armor. Influenced by German tank destroyers like the Jagdpanther and Ferdinand, the whole Re project began development. It was meant to be a modified Chi Re with a 105mm cannon and increased armor all around the tank. There were at least two documented design variants. The original one placed the fighting compartment at the rear of the hull with the engine in the center, closely resembling the German Ferdinand. A second variant, sometimes called the Hull Re 2, redesigned the superstructure to be integrated with the sides of the hull and positioned centrally, making it more similar to the Jagdtiger. Details beyond this become difficult to verify, as much of what circulates online about a third variant traces back to sources we'll get to shortly. However, none of these tanks made it past the design stage. Although the 105mm gun was tested, there are no documented prototypes of the vehicle itself, and only a photograph of a wooden mock-up is commonly associated with the project. Like with the E100, the war situation had not developed to Japan's advantage, so the project was too costly to even attempt. So if it was never built, why is it in the game? When the Japanese tank tree was first being added, Gaijin hired the help of Mai Waffenträger. She was a community researcher who influenced a lot of the Japanese tanks we see in War Thunder. At the time, the tree was by far the smallest in the game, with large gaps between BRs and very limited lines. This was back when the game was still focused on World War II, so we didn't have any Cold War vehicles to fill the gaps. As such, the devs started looking for more experimental tanks, which is where the Hull Re comes in. Like I mentioned though, the tank was never produced, and even back then, Gaijin didn't add many paper vehicles, with the exception of a handful. The weak link was Mai. In her blog, she first wrote about the Hull Re in November of 2016. In this article, she explained the history behind the project and emphasizes that her research is still ongoing, with placeholders and provisional information. In December of 2016, the Japanese tank tree was added, but interestingly enough, the Hull Re was not included. A year later, in September of 2017, Mai released a follow-up article claiming that she found documentation about the tank from a private collection. This included official schematics, photographs of the vehicle's construction, and drawings of the tank's final design. However, she stated that she wasn't given permission to upload the photographs to her site. The article's tone is a lot more confident and authoritative this time, and that's where the issues start piling up. In this blog post, which has since been deleted, she claimed that the tank carried an 1100 horsepower engine, a more powerful variant of its cannon, and a total of 5 tanks being built by the end of the war. All of these backed up by her supposed documents. In the article, she provides a sketch by Tomi Ohara, one of the most prominent Japanese military engineers, and a production chart which shows that 5 Hull Re tanks were built. The problem is, both of these are disputed and lack any credible sources. The sketch Mai provided, supposedly depicting a third Hull Re 3 design, does not appear in any of Hara's published works. A lot of people in the community assume that Mai drew the sketch herself, and she based it off the wooden mock-up. For the spec, specs, the 1100 horsepower engine is highly unlikely. Japan was struggling for resources towards the end of the war, and the army was less of a priority compared to the Air Force and Navy. As for the so-called production chart, it's actually a cropped version of a maintenance plan from 1945. Notice how I said plan and not production. This doesn't prove that 5 Ho-Ris were actually built. So where does that leave us? In the game, we have 2 variants, the so-called prototype and production. The latter variant has an improved cannon, much better armor, and nearly double the engine power of the former, which were proved by Mai's documents. That being said, ever since 2018, she has reiterated that she purposely exaggerated the tank specs and lied about the production numbers. Her reasoning was that she gave Gaijin 2 versions of the Ho-Ri, a more realistic variant with supposedly documented components or a what-if model with limited details. Gaijin apparently chose the latter since it was better for the sake of gameplay. She has also claimed that she proposed another variant of the Ho-Ri to be added, but this was rejected because it would take too long to add. Whether these are true or not is anyone's guess, but the fact remains that no documentation exists to prove that the Ho-Ri was ever built. Realism rank F. According to the wiki, a small number of T-3476s were sent to China during World War II but saw extremely limited action. The USSR did sell a large number of tanks to China, including T-3485s, ISUs, IS-2s, and plenty more. However, there are no documented deliveries of T-3476s and no evidence that the PLA ever used these tanks either. Instead, it was North Korea who received them in 1950. The Tank Encyclopedia has a really good article covering this. I'll leave a link in the description. Now, this is pure speculation, but I think the devs took a look at the Chinese tech tree in World of Tanks, which also contains the T-3476, and thought, hey, why don't we add this tank as well? As it stands, the vehicle is technically fictional, but if they just changed the operator to North Korea, that would solve the issue. Realism rank D. During the Korean War, an M36 was captured by the People's Volunteer Army, an expeditionary force sent to North Korea by the People's Republic of China. There's no documentation of the PRC ever using the tank though. It's currently displayed in a museum in Beijing. A few years later, the Republic of China purchased a small number of surplus M36B2s from France, which were used against the PLA all the way up until the 1970s. Here's where things get a bit tricky though. The tank we have in the game is the base M36, and the operating country is the ROC. Like I said though, it was the PRC who got their hands on the 36, while Taiwan operated the B2 variant. As a result, the vehicle in War Thunder is also technically fictional. The tank was added to the tree before the B2 was even in the game, so I guess that's why it's the way it is. They'll probably replace it later on though. Realism rank C. We went over the Chinese one, now let's talk about the Japanese M36. In 1955, a single M36B2 was loaned to Japan by the United States for research purposes. The tank carried the M3A1 anti-tank cannon, which the Japanese weren't licensed to manufacture themselves. Instead, they studied the gun and tested it on the field, which led to the creation of the STA series of tanks, and eventually the Type 61. That puts the Japanese M36 in a bit of a tricky position in the game. It technically was acquired by Japan, but they were not allowed to use it in combat, and it was only for research. I'm guessing it was added since it technically has some credibility, and there was a BR gap between the NATO and Type 75. Realism rank C. The Panther II was actually a real project, designed to make up for the shortcomings of the original Panther before it even saw combat. It would have received thicker frontal armor and an upgraded suspension and drivetrain, similar to the Tiger II. A single prototype hull was completed during the war, but the project never progressed much further, as Germany shifted focus towards mass-producing existing tank designs rather than introducing new ones. The Allies captured the incomplete hull, which was later fitted with a standard Panther G turret as a placeholder. The German Design Bureau had plans to fit it with a dedicated turret called the Panther II, which would have had thicker armor and a new rangefinder among other improvements. None of these went beyond the design stage, and this is not the turret found in the game. That would be the Schmalturm, which was designed after the Panther II was cancelled and meant for the Panther F instead. On top of that, the tank was never meant to carry the 88mm cannon either. There were late war proposals to mount the 88mm on a Panther chassis, but these were only on paper and the cannon wouldn't even fit in the turret in the first place. Likewise, the infrared night vision device on the roof was used on later models, but there's no evidence that the Panther II's designs included them. As a result, the tank we have in the game is the actual Panther II hull, fitted with a turret designed for the Panther F, with a cannon that was never used on the Panther series, and using night vision technology that might have been considered if the project ever took off. The reason it was added to the game in the first place was to fill some gaps in the German tech tree back in the day, but when more vehicles got added, it was removed in 2019 for being fictional. Personally, I also think they added it because it just looks so damn cool and people would be drawn to the game to play it. I mean, it definitely worked on me. Realism rank D. And that about wraps it up for this video. Special thanks to the Human Oddity for helping out. I still have a big list to go through, so if you want to see a second episode, give the video a like. All of my sources can be found in the description, and if you have any information you'd like to add, leave it in the comments. Other than that, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.